Hi everyone, I'm Trish Connor-Cato. Welcome to the Excel 2019 Visual Basic for Applications video course. This course is for beginning users looking to automate repetitive and recurring tasks in Microsoft Excel. VBA is Microsoft's programming language, and it's built into the Office applications. Our focus during this course is on Excel specifically. You'll be equipped with the basics to start writing your own VBA code, modify the code behind macros you've already recorded, and have an understanding of how VBA lends itself to creating efficiency in your daily tasks. We'll start with the basics, where you'll learn the types of things you can do with VBA versus recording macros in Excel, as well as some key terminology which will help in your VBA journey. And you will get to edit VBA code. You'll learn the importance of macro-enabled workbooks and how to save them, as well as how to modify some security settings. We'll move on to understanding the Excel object model, collections, and how to reference objects in VBA code. Once these basics are covered, you'll be ready to move on, learning about the different types of procedures, creating procedures, learning the scope of procedures, and working with methods. You'll also learn how to get VBA context-specific help from within the Visual Basic editor. If you're enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe. If you want to earn certificates and digital badges, please become a member of our Patreon. The link is in our video description. If you have any questions you want answered by one of our instructors, please join our off-site community. The link is in the description as well. As always, if this course has exercise files, you'll find them in the video description below. In our first lesson, Getting Started, you're going to be learning about an overview of VBA that includes what type of language it is, why you would want to use Visual Basic for applications versus recording macros, and advantages that it can give you in terms of efficiency. We'll move into recording a macro and running it in Excel, and then we'll go into the Visual Basic editor environment, and you'll get an overview of the environment before we start editing a macro in VBA. You'll learn how to save a macro-enabled workbook and the importance of doing so. You'll learn a little bit about macro security. Now, in this lesson, we're going to be using two files that are in the video description. They're both Excel files. One is named Vehicles and the other one Vehicles 2. We will be creating a Vehicles macro-enabled workbook during this lesson, and the name of that workbook is shown on the slide. You will not find it in the video description at this time. So what you would want to do is grab those two Excel files, Vehicles and Vehicles 2, from the video description and put them somewhere on your system where you have easy access to them. Before we get hands-on, let's go ahead and get an overview of VBA. So as mentioned in the introductions, VBA is a Microsoft programming language that is currently built into the Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Outlook, and Access applications. It's one of the many programming languages that evolved from the basic programming language, which was developed in the 1960s. It was first released in Excel 5, and that was in the Office 1995 suite. Since then, it evolved to encompass the applications that are mentioned in this slide. VBA is known as an object-oriented programming language, OOP. This means that everything within an application is an object, including the application itself. Objects have their own set of features and uses known as properties and methods, respectively. Here's an example of object-oriented programming. So the example using Excel would be that Excel is an object that contains other objects. For example, cells, worksheets, charts, pivot tables, shapes, etc. Each object has its own properties. For example, a worksheet has a name. A workbook can be opened and closed, and these are a couple of a workbook's methods. So methods are like actions. You will work with objects and manipulate them via their properties and methods throughout this course. So why VBA? It can give you the ability to run macros automatically, create user-defined functions which can be used in the Excel application. You can use VBA to control other Office applications, and mostly to automate recurring and repetitive tasks. Don't get me wrong, the power of macros is excellent in Excel, but VBA does have some advantages. So, for example, there are no limitations. When you're recording macros, you are limited to those tasks that you can perform in the Excel interface. With VBA, you can attach code to events so that it runs automatically when the event occurs. For example, activating a worksheet would be an event. VBA allows for decision making, and it has several decision making structures ensuring code only runs when certain conditions are met. The looping structures in VBA ensure code runs multiple times based on a condition. And then there's forms and boxes. You can use VBA to create user input forms, dialog boxes, and message boxes in Excel. So we're going to get started. I have the Vehicles Excel file open from the video description, and we are going to be recording a macro in this file. Now the thing is, we want to prepare Excel for recording a macro. There are several ways that you can start a macro recording, but we want to add the Developer tab to the ribbon, as that is one of the ways that you can record your macros, review your macros, so on and so forth. So the first thing we're going to do is right-click on any ribbon tab, Home, Insert, Page Layout, whatever. And when you right-click on a ribbon tab, you're going to choose Customize the Ribbon. In the Customize the Ribbon options box on the right side, everything that has a check mark is a tab that's showing on your ribbon. We want to check the box in front of Developer, and then at the bottom, you're going to click OK. And now you have the Developer tab on your ribbon, and let's navigate to that tab. So for parts of this course, we're going to be using this make-believe vehicle information. So we have make-believe VIN numbers, we have year, we have make, model, classification, color, dealer cost, and manufacturer suggested retail price columns in here. And we're going to record a macro that is going to apply the column headings and also a little bit of formatting. So on the Developer tab of the ribbon, in the first group, the code group, you're going to click on the Record Macro button. And don't worry, it's not going to be recording until after we clear the dialog box. So when you click that button, the Record Macro dialog box opens, and you have to give your macro a name. Well, you don't want your macros to have generic names, so make them as descriptive as possible. Now, of course, there are rules to naming macros. Macro names must begin with a letter, can be alphanumeric, and can contain the underscore character, no spaces. So we're going to name this macro capital A, add, capital F, formatting, all mushed together. So it follows the naming convention. We're not going to assign a shortcut key to the macro to make it run later. We don't need to do that here. And you have choices as to where the macro is going to be stored. So by default, it's going to just be in this workbook, the file that it's going to be recorded in, this workbook. Your other choices are a new workbook or your personal macro workbook. If you store it in the personal macro workbook, that workbook opens in the background every time you open Excel. And so the macro is available to any and all Excel files. We're going to leave it on this workbook. And there's another way that you can access it from another file that you'll see a little bit later. I like to add a description to a macro so that if anyone comes behind me and they need information about what the macro is going to do, the description will cover that. So we're going to type in the description box, add column headers, comma, bold and centered, period, apply accounting format to column G, period, auto fit columns A through H. So that is the intent of the macro that we're going to record. So at this point, once we click OK, everything we do until we stop the recording is going to be recorded. And I like to say this. While you're recording the macro, if you make a mistake and you correct the mistake, you don't have to start all over again because it's recording both the mistake and the correction. So go ahead and click OK. You'll notice on the Developer tab now, where it used to say Record Macro, we now have our Stop Recording icon there. And we'll use that when we're completely done going through all the steps that we're saving in our macro. So for right now, the first thing that we want to do here is right-click on row heading 1 and choose Insert. So we get a blank row, a new row 1, and that's the row that we're going to be adding our column headers in. And so we're going to click in cell A1 and we're going to type VIN, V-I-N, and I'm doing it in all capital letters, so Vehicle Identification Number. I'm going to press my tab key to get over to B1, and I'm going to type year, tab, make, tab, model, tab again, classification. The next one is color. The next one is dealer cost, 2 separate words. And lastly, in all caps, MSRP for manufacturer's suggested retail price. After that one, I'm going to just press enter. So we have our headers in where they need to be. And then we're going to select row heading 1 again. And we're going to go to the Home tab of the ribbon. In the font group, we're going to make it bold. And in the paragraph group, we're going to use the Center Alignment button. So the headers are centered within their cells. Now, we're also going to add in adjusting column width in here, so don't worry about that right now. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to select column G by clicking on its column heading. So the entire column is selected. And on the Home tab in the number group, we're going to click on the $ for the accounting number format. And then the last thing we're going to do is we are going to select column headings A through H. And I just clicked on A and dragged across. And we want to auto fit these columns with, right? So that's what we want to do. We want to auto fit. And we do that by going to the cells group over to the right on the Home tab of the ribbon. And in the cells group, you're going to select the format drop down. And from that drop down, you're going to select auto fit column width. So now every column is wide enough to display everything in the column. And if we were to make entries and they were wider than what they are now, it would automatically adjust the column width. Now, typically, when I'm done recording my macro, before I click stop recording, I just like to click on any blank cell just to make sure that nothing is selected. We're going to go back to the developer tab and choose stop recording in the code group. Typically, you cannot undo the effects of a macro. So we just recorded this macro. While we were recording it, we were doing the steps. Now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to press Control Z, which is undo. And the only thing it undid was the column auto width. Everything else, our headings are there. They're bold and centered. We have our accounting format and column G. And it just undid the column auto fit. So we want to redo that step. So we're going to do Control Y, which is redo. And we end up again with the result of our macro. You will learn some workarounds for undoing the effects of a macro later on. But for right now, we want to test this macro on a different sheet. So we're on the Inventory Sheet tab in this file. We have two other sheets. Let's go to Sheet 2. Sheet 2 has the same data that was on Sheet 1 initially when we came in here. And this is a good sheet to test our macro on. So we can go on the Developer tab in the Code group. This is where you can use the Macros button to access any macros that you may have in this file. So we're going to click on Macros, and we only have one, Add Formatting. It's already selected. And on the right side, you're going to click the Run button. So at the end of the day, you should have those column headings. They should be centered and bolded. And the auto width, the column auto width is in effect. And you have the accounting number format in column G. So while we were recording our macro, it was generating Visual Basic code in the background, Visual Basic for Applications code in the background. Now, on the Developer tab, we can get to Visual Basic. You will learn other ways of starting macro recording without using the Developer tab. You'll learn shortcuts throughout the course on how to switch back and forth between Visual Basic for Applications and the Excel interface. But for right now, on the Developer tab, the first button in the code group is Visual Basic. Let's go ahead and click on it. Visual Basic for Application opens in its own separate window. And so you literally have this window and your Excel window open at the same time. And we're just going to focus on the VBA window right now. And so before we get started in here, we're ultimately going to edit the code behind the macro we just recorded. But I just want you to get acclimated to this environment. This is known as the Visual Basic Editor, or VBE. Just so you know, it doesn't have a ribbon interface. It never updated. It still has the old school menu bar where you have file, edit, view, and everything. And then underneath it, it has some toolbars that we use. This was like pre-ribbon days, how Excel itself and all the other Office applications used to be. On the left side of your screen, you may have two different panels open. You have a Project Explorer window at the top and a Properties window at the bottom. If you don't have both of those panes showing, you can go up to the View menu and you can click on Project Explorer and then come back to View and click on Properties window. And you can see the shortcut keys for both of them. Or you could do Control R to bring up Project Explorer and F4 to bring up the Properties window. Let's talk about the Project Explorer window first. For every Excel file that you have open, you will have a separate project. So right now I only have one Excel file open. It's the vehicles.xlsx file. So it creates its own VBA project. and it has the name of the file afterwards. Now I may have a few things here because I have some add-ins that create projects as well. If you don't have them, you're fine. But this is a cautionary tale here because there have been times when I've had like 5 Excel files open and I find myself doing some coding and then I look and see that I'm doing it in the wrong files project. So I can always cut and paste it to the right project, but you do want to be aware of what project you're working in. When you click on VBA project vehicles.xlsx, it expands and you can look up at the title bar and it lets you know that it is in that project now. So just kind of get in the habit of making sure you're in the right project. It has 2 folders in that project. Microsoft Excel objects. Those are your sheet tabs. So we had the inventory sheet, we had a sheet 2 and a sheet 3, and then the entire workbook is an object as well. So it lists that. Then you have another folder called modules. That folder was created when we started recording our macro. Actually, when we finished recording our macro, it created that modules folder. Your code is stored in modules. So expand the modules folder and it created a default module. It names it module 1. And if we were to go back over to Excel now and record another macro, it would also put it in module 1. If we were to close Excel, saving it properly, and then reopen it and start recording a macro, it would create module 2. It would always give it the next number, module 2, module 3. You can also rename modules in here, which you'll see in a little bit. So if you click on module 1, you will actually see the code window, and that is everything that it created while we were recording our macro. So it converted our steps into VBA code. And we're going to edit this in just a little bit, but I want you to have your editor window be as comfortable an environment for you to be working in. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to go up to the Tools menu and click on Options. We will revisit some of these settings later in the course, but when you go into Options, you have 4 tabs: Editor, Editor Format, General, and Docking. One setting that I want to make sure that you have checked, make sure all of the code settings have a check mark in front of them. And as we work in the course, I'll explain what these settings mean. Your Windows settings, you can actually have all of those checked as well. Go to the Editor Format tab. And this is where you can set your font size. So I have my font set to 14 point, which is comfortable for me. I can bump it up to 16. And then at the bottom, I'm going to click OK. So font size, and if you want to go back in and change the font, I'm cool with the code looking font, Courier font. That works for me. I'm just so comfortable with it. It doesn't bother me. So I just wanted you to know that you can change some of those settings in the environment for yourself. And for the ones that we are going to be utilizing in the course, we'll go back in there and talk about what those settings are actually doing. The other thing we want to customize before we edit our code is we want to add 3 icons to the toolbar that we'll be using frequently throughout this course. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just right click in a blank area of any toolbar and go to Customize. And the Customize dialog box opens. You want to make sure you're on the Commands tab at the top. And then you'll see a list of categories that mimic the menus that are up there: File, Edit, View, Insert. So basically, you're going to have to tell it where it resides on the menu in order to add it to your toolbar. So under Categories, we're going to select Edit. And then all the commands from the Edit menu show on the right side of your screen. And on the right side of your screen, you're going to scroll down we're looking for two commands. The first one is comment block, and the second is uncomment block. So what I'm going to do when I find comment block, I'm going to click and hold on it, and I'm going to drag it right after the question mark on my toolbar. And then I'm going to grab uncomment block and drag it right after comment block. Now we have one more command that we're going to add up there. Under categories, we're going to click on debug. And the command at the top of the list is compile project. I'm going to grab that and drag it right after uncomment block. So I have comment block, uncomment block, and compile project. When we get ready to use those commands, I will explain what they're going to do for us. They're going to be kind of helpers for you. Let's examine the code that was generated while we were recording our macro. First of all, let's look at the information starting from the top. We'll talk about the option explicit statement a little bit later in the course. Don't worry about that right now. What I want you to focus on is the name of our code, add formatting. It comes after the word sub, and you'll notice that both option explicit and sub are in blue. That means those are Visual Basic for Application keywords. They mean a specific thing in this code and should only be used for their intended purpose. It creates what's called a sub-procedure to contain our code. So it starts with the sub statement, and if you scroll down at the very bottom, it concludes with an end sub statement. You have to have both. If you have a sub and not an end sub, you're going to get an error message. But it did this automatically while we were recording our macro. It gave it the name that we named it, add formatting, and then after it, it put a set of parentheses. Some procedures have parameters that need to be defined, and that would happen inside the parentheses. We're not there yet, but that's why they're there, and they need to be there. Then you'll notice several lines that are in green beginning with apostrophes. Those are comment lines. So when we were filling out the record macro dialog box, right, we named it add formatting, and we put a description in, add column headers, bold and centered, apply accounting format, blah, blah, blah. Comments are meant to describe your code. It's a good idea to comment your code liberally. I've written code before and didn't comment it, and 6 months later, I had to figure out what the intent of the code that I wrote was. So comments are really good. And so when you put a description in the record macro box, it comes in as comments. They're informational. When you run your code or execute your code, the comments do not execute. And we can do a little bit of cleanup there. We don't need that blank apostrophe at the top, so I'm going to just delete it. And then I'm going to delete the two underneath because they're not necessary either. And then it starts our code. Well, the first thing we did is we right-clicked on row 1 and inserted a new row. So that's rows 1:1 dot select. And then selection dot insert, right? And so it moved everything, it shifted everything down and gave us the blank row at the top. And then we clicked in cell A1 and we typed it in. So that's range, even though it's a cell, range A1 dot select. Notice the quote, the double quotes inside the parentheses there surrounding A1. And an active cell, which is now cell A1. Don't worry about formula R1C1 right now, but active cell dot formula R1C1 equals whatever we typed in that cell. Then B1, C1, D1, E1, F1, G1, H1. Same thing. And then we selected row 1 again. So at this point, we're all the way down here in the code. when we selected row 1 again, and once we selected it, we made it bold. So before that, selection.font.bold would equal false. When we made it bold, it changed the false to true. And then you have what's known as a with, end with block. Starts with the word with, and if you go down several rows, it ends with an end with statement. And this is an interesting thing. You'll learn more. It's known as a construct, right? You'll learn more about this construct as we go in the course. But this allows you, anything that you do in the paragraph group on the Home tab is included in this with block. Bold is not in the paragraph group on the Excel ribbon, right? But your alignments are the ability to wrap text, your orientation, whether you're going to indent, merging cells. All of that is included in the paragraph group on the Home tab in Excel. So all of these settings here are those things that mimic the paragraph group. And what we did is we centered those headings. So what happened is when we did that, the dot horizontal alignment equals Excel center. It was changed from Excel left because typically things are left aligned in a cell. So all of these other settings are the default settings. The only thing that changed was Excel center. One of the things you want in your code is for it to be as concise as possible. We don't need everything that's in that with block. We really would just keep the horizontal and vertical alignment, but we didn't do any wrap text, orientation, indenting, any of that kind of stuff. So we're going to select the lines from wrap text all the way down to the dot merge cells equals false statement. We need to leave that end with statement underneath that. So once you have dot wrap text through dot merge cells lines selected, go ahead and press delete. And then I'm a little OCD, so I'm going to shift tab to get the end with statement back in line with the with statement. So if I have to troubleshoot code, I want to make sure that I can see with and end with at the same margin, if that makes sense. And when we start putting our code together, I'll be walking you through how it should be formulated. So when we were recording our macro, we formatted column G as currency. Column G is the dealer cost column, and we should have formatted the manufacturer's suggested retail price column, column H. Well, it says currency in here, but it's actually accounting. Okay, so we want both of those columns to be formatted in accounting. Underneath your end with statements, you'll see columns, and then in parentheses and double quotes, G:(G) dot select. The second G, you're going to change to an H. So now we're telling it when this macro runs, select both of those columns and apply the format on both of those columns. And that's what we want to do. And then we have where we selected columns A through H, and we did our columns auto fit. And then I said, at the end, before we stop recording, click on any blank cell. Whatever cell you clicked on, it will say range, and then in parentheses and double quotes, that cell, dot select. We're going to change whatever that cell is, that cell reference, we want it to be A1. And so we just modified the code that was generated for our macros. Now we're just going to modify our comment, our second comment line here, to make it accurate. So apply accounting format to columns. We're going to make that plural, columns G and then and H. And when you move away from that line, it will turn green again, indicating that it's a comment. Now that we've edited our code, and we'll test it shortly, we want to change the name of Module 1. You want your module names to be as descriptive as possible. It's kind of like folders that you're organizing your code in. So we're going to have several modules throughout this course, and we don't want them to be Module 1, Module 2, Module 3, Module 4. So we're going to use the Properties window to make some changes to properties. So we're going to start with renaming Module 1. In your Project Explorer window, click on Module 1. And then if you look down at your Properties window, it says Properties for Module 1, the object that we have selected. And the only property a module has is the name property. So if you double click on Name, it highlights Module 1 for you. And we're going to talk about a prefix that we're going to use here. To identify it in a list as a module, we're going to use lowercase mod, M-O-D, to indicate that it is a module. And then we're going to give it its name, and that's going to be capital F and the rest of the word first. So mod first. If we're looking at a bunch of stuff in a list, we'll know that it's a module because it has that 3-character prefix of mod. And then when you press enter, you'll notice that it updated the name of the module in the Project Explorer window. You can change the names of sheet tabs in here as well. So in your Project Explorer, you have that Microsoft Excel Objects folder where you're seeing your 3 sheet tabs. We have one, and it's called Sheet 1, and then in parentheses, Inventory. Sheet 1 is how Excel knows that sheet. Inventory is what it was renamed to, but the system identifies it as Sheet 1. And then we have Sheet 2 and we have Sheet 3. We're going to click on Sheet 3, and in the Properties window, you'll notice that there are 2 name properties. The one at the top is indicative of the system name, right? So what Excel knows is that name is the name property at the top. My arrow got a little skewed there. And then you have a name property lower down in your Properties window. And the one that's lower down is whatever you decide to name that sheet. So the second name property, the one that is not in parentheses, you can double click right on name and it selects Sheet 3. And we're going to type new vehicles, 2 separate words, just like you would do it in Excel if you were renaming the sheet tab, and press enter. So notice in your Project Explorer now, you have your Sheet 1, which had already been renamed to Inventory, Sheet 3, which we just named New Vehicles. We added the Compile Project icon to our toolbar, and what that does is it kind of goes through your code for you, and it checks to make sure that everything is okay. If there's a problem, it will let you know by highlighting that problem. So what we're going to do is make sure you're clicked anywhere between your sub and in sub statements. You can be anywhere between those 2 statements. And go up to your toolbar and find your Compile VBA project icon that we added there. And just give it a click. And it dims out, and you didn't get any notifications of anything wrong. So your code is good. Good habit to get into. Good icon to have on your toolbar. So now that we've modified our code, we want to save this file. And if you look up at the top, your title bar, it's vehicles.xlsx, the standard 4-character Excel workbook extension. If we don't save this file in the right way, it's as if we didn't record a macro and we wouldn't have any VBA code in it. So you have to save it as a macro-enabled workbook. As a matter of fact, let's check this out. On the toolbar, you have a Save button. And notice when you hover over it, it wants to save the file. go ahead and click on that save icon. And you get this pop-up message that says, the following features cannot be saved in macro-free workbooks. And then it says VB project. That's your Visual Basic project. To save a file with your code in it, click No and then choose a macro-enabled file type. To continue saving as a macro-free workbook, click Yes. We are going to click No. When you click No, it gives you the Save As dialog box. Now, we're going to leave the same name, Vehicles, but we need to change the type. Right underneath the file name where it says Save As Type, click on Excel Workbook, and we want the second choice, Excel Macro Enabled Workbook. Again, if we just save this as a regular Excel file, it's not going to keep your code. So we need it to be macro enabled. And part of that is for your security, which I'll explain in just a few moments. And after we have it set as Excel Macro Enabled Workbook, we're going to go ahead and click Save. So now if you look up at the title bar, it has a different extension, .xlsm. That's your macro enabled Excel workbook extension. And so it will retain our code. And now that we've saved it as macro enabled, we're going to switch over to Excel to test our edited code. There's a couple of ways that you can switch over to Excel, back and forth between Excel and Visual Basic. First of all, and I'm not going to use this way, but the first button on the toolbar is Excel. So I can use that to switch back over to Excel. I'm a real shortcut key person. So Alt F11 will also switch me back and forth between Excel and the Visual Basic editor. So I can just keep doing Alt F11 and you see that it switches back and forth between the two separate application windows that are open. When I am back in Excel, I'm going to do Control O to get the open dialog box to display. So this is where we're going to open the Vehicles 2 file. And by the way, if you look at my screen, we have two files. We have Vehicles and Vehicles 2, right? We have two versions of Vehicles. I'm pointing to the macro enabled worksheet. And then we have our original one, which is just a regular Excel file. And if you look closely, the icons are slightly different. The macro enabled worksheet icon has an extra little thing in its lower right-hand corner than the other regular Excel icons. So we want to open the Vehicles 2 Excel workbook. And so we have two Excel files open. We have our macro enabled Vehicles and we have Vehicles 2. Earlier when we went to record our macro, I said, if you save your macro in the Personal Macro Workbook, it opens behind the scenes every time you open any file in Excel. This is a workaround. We save that macro in the Vehicles file, but we can use it in Vehicles 2 as long as the Vehicles.xlsm file is open. I don't typically save in the Personal Macro Workbook. There are occasions that I do that if I'm going to use it across a wide range of files, but typically my files are structured so differently that macros from one won't work well with others. So what we're going to do here is we want to use the macro that we recorded, the add formatting macro. We want to use it in this file. Another way of getting to your macros instead of going to the Developer tab is you can go to the View tab of the ribbon. And all the way to the right, the last button is Macros. So check this out. If I do the drop down arrow under Macros, I can view or record them. And I'm going to just go to View Macros. Notice that it gives the file name, exclamation point, and then the name of the macro. That vehicles.xlsm file has to be open, and it's showing you macros in all open workbooks. If we did the drop down and we choose this workbook, right? it's showing there as well because the other one's open so you can access it. But it really resides in that other file, vehicles, the macro-enabled vehicles file. And so we're going to just click on Vehicles XLSM, exclamation point add formatting, and choose Run. So you'll notice that it gave us our headings. They're centered and bolded. Notice one of the changes we made is we had it do the accounting format on the MSRP column, right? So that worked. We also cleaned up some comments and stuff in there as well. So you will see that if you have the file that contains the macro open, you can access it from other Excel files that you open. Also notice that the active cell is cell A1 because we changed that as well. We're going to close this Vehicles 2 file without saving any changes to it. So I'm going to just close that file. When it prompts me, I'm going to say don't save the changes. And I still have my macro enabled vehicles file open. So in our macro enabled vehicles file, first take a note, look at your sheet tabs. So we renamed sheet 3 new vehicles, and that's what shows on the sheet down there. We did that in the properties window in the Visual Basic editor. So another change that we made in there that you're seeing in here. And I mentioned earlier, and we saw that you can't really undo the effects of a macro. When we tried to do it, it didn't really undo it. It only undid the column auto fit, right? So we saw that. But I said that there is a workaround. Like, let's say on this sheet 2, right, that we wanted to test the macro. And it's already been run, so we certainly don't want it to put another row in here, right, at the top. So on sheet 2, what I'm going to have you do is just delete row 1. So I'm just right-clicking on the row header and choosing delete. And now I'm going to go to the View tab, drop down, View My Macros, and I'm going to rerun this macro. So it puts the headings back in, right? We see that we have the currency format on, or accounting format on the columns G and H, and it put us in cell A1. So you would have to kind of manually delete the effects of a macro to rerun it on a sheet like that. We're going to go ahead and right click on the sheet 2 sheet tab, and we want to delete sheet 2 and confirm the deletion. So now we have 2 sheets. In this macro-enabled file, we have our inventory sheet, and we have our blank, for right now, new vehicle sheet. Let's go ahead and save and close this vehicles file. Now we're going to explore what happens when you open a file that is macro-enabled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just relaunch Excel and go to Open and navigate to wherever you saved your macro-enabled vehicles file. And when you're there, you can go ahead and select the vehicles macro-enabled file. I'm going to just double-click on it here and open it. Now, because it's macro-enabled, you're going to get the yellow band underneath the ribbon that says Security Warning, Macros have been disabled. And then there's an Enable Content button. Microsoft does this by default. That's the default security settings for a file that contains macros that has been saved as macro enabled. And it's to kind of protect you. So if you receive a file from an unknown source, you probably do not want to enable the content. It's not the typical way of delivering viruses to computers anymore, but it used to be delivered via macros that were infected via viruses. So if it's from a trusted source, you can go ahead and enable the content, which we're going to do. Now, That can be annoying if you're working with a lot of macro-enabled files and you know the people that are creating them, maybe your colleagues, yourself, you all work in teams or something like that. So we're going to modify a trust center setting, and you'll see how this works. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the File tab, and all the way at the bottom on the left, you're going to go to Options. On the left side of Excel Options, at the bottom, you're going to click on Trust Center. And then on the right, you're going to click on Trust Center Settings. So the first thing I want you to see here is on the left side, click on Macro Settings. So the default setting is to disable VBA macros with notification. That's what the yellow band that we got. And I wouldn't suggest changing that. What you can do to make it a little bit more convenient and you don't get that yellow band when you're, using files back and forth amongst your teammates or colleagues is we can set either trusted documents on the left or trusted locations. I always do trusted locations. It's more global than trusted documents. So click on trusted locations and I'll tell you how this works, right? So I set up a folder on my desktop. It's called Files for Video Description, and it's where I've stored all the files that we're going to be using during this course. And I want to set that as a trusted location. So any of the macro-enabled file formats that we're going to be using during this course, that folder and its any subfolders will be a trusted location. So what I'm going to do underneath here is I'm going to click on Add New Location toward the bottom right. And then I have to navigate to that location. So I'm going to just do that. I know it's on my desktop. So you're navigating to wherever you put the files that you're going to be using. So the folder name for me is Files for Video Description. And I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to say subfolders of this location are also trusted. So any folders within that folder would also be trusted. And then I'm going to click OK. And once I do that, it shows up in this list of trusted locations. So it could be a shared network drive. If all of your files that you and your team are working together on are in a specific shared network drive, you can use that as a trusted location so that you don't get the yellow warning and have to enable content. At the bottom, we're going to click OK. And then let's close and reopen this vehicle's macro-enabled file. So when I open it, it's in a trusted location now, so I don't get the yellow banner under the ribbon. I don't have to enable content, and I didn't disable the default Trust Center setting. So that's still in place, but this file is now in a trusted location, so I'm able to open it with no problems. Just to recap what we covered in this introductory lesson 1, the Getting Started section, we reviewed what you can do with Visual Basic for applications. You learned that it is an object-oriented programming language that is part of the Microsoft Office suite. You learned that it's the code that is produced in the background when you record a macro. You also learned the advantages of Visual Basic for applications over recording macros. We moved into customizing the ribbon to add the Developer tab, and we recorded a macro in Excel that added and formatted column headings on a worksheet. We then toured the Visual Basic Editor environment, and were able to edit the VBA code produced by our recorded macro. We also changed some VBE settings, including font size, and we saved a macro-enabled file. You tested your edited macro, and lastly, modified some Trust Center security settings by adding a trusted location. You also understand the importance of saving a macro-enabled workbook or else all of your work would be lost. Before we get hands-on again in Lesson 3, we need to go over some background information. And I should mention at this point that this slide deck is also in the video description, and you can use it for your future reference. No one is expecting you to memorize all of these things. So we need to talk about the Excel object model. You need to understand collections and how to reference objects, and also how to simplify object references. You learned that VBA is an object-oriented programming language, OOP. And we discussed that that means that Excel is an object that contains objects. Objects that have attributes known as properties can be manipulated through VBA. And objects also have methods, which are actions, that can be performed on them via VBA. So this is a foundational lesson here. And again, you'll be able to reference this slide deck. So the Excel object model hierarchy is a hierarchical structure of Excel and all its objects, with Excel, the application, residing at the top of the hierarchy. So you can see on this slide that we have the application at the top of the hierarchy here on the left. And then underneath the application, you would have add-in objects, window objects, workbook objects. And then we expand on the workbook object. A workbook object has a name, a Visual Basic project. A workbook also contains worksheets. Worksheets can contain comments, hyperlinks, names, ranges, and pivot tables, for example. So a simplistic example is over on the right, where you have Excel, the application, which is an object, at the top of the hierarchy. Then you have a workbook. A worksheet is an object of a workbook, and a range is an object of a worksheet. And you're going to be seeing this as we're working in this video course. The next thing you need to understand are collections. Now, collections are key in VBA programming. A collection is simply a group of objects of the same type. A collection is also an object. Collections are useful when you need to work with not just one worksheet, but with a couple of them or all of them. You'll learn later that your VBA code can loop through all members of a collection and do something to each one. We have a table that shows the collections, the most commonly used collections in Visual Basic. So you have the Workbooks collection, and it would be all currently open workbook objects. So all currently open Excel files are part of the Workbooks collection. You have a Worksheets collection, and it's a collection of all worksheets contained in a particular workbook. The Charts collection is a collection of all chart objects. So these are Excel worksheets that only have charts on them. A collection of all chart objects contained in a particular workbook object. A chart sheet is not part of the worksheets collection, as it is not considered a worksheet. It is in fact a worksheet, but it only has a chart on it. And then you have the Sheets collection, plural. A collection of all worksheet objects contained in a particular workbook object. So you have a Worksheets collection, and then you have a Sheets collection. What is the difference? The Sheets collection contains all worksheets and all chart sheets, whereas the Worksheets collection is just all of the worksheets, and then the Charts collection is just all of the chart sheets. The Sheets collection combines them all. So you can reference these things sometimes across different collections, as you will see when we resume with our hands-on stuff. In order to access the objects that you want to reference in your code, you're going to have to learn how to reference them. So you can work with an entire collection quite easily, but it's most often the case that you'll need to work with a particular object in a collection. For example, if you need to work with a particular worksheet, you'll need to know how to reference it. When it comes to referring to an object in a collection, you can either use its name or its index number. To reference a single object from a collection, you put the item's name or index number in parentheses after the name of the collection. So you have two examples on this slide that refer to the exact same object. The first worksheet in the workbook. So worksheets, and then in parentheses and double quotes, sheet 1 by name, or worksheets, and in parentheses 1 by index number. When you refer to an object by its name, the name must be enclosed in quotes. When referring to an object by its index number, you need to know that the first object in the collection has the index number of 1. Using a workbook with 3 worksheets as an example, sheet 1 has an index number of 1, sheet 2 would be 2, and sheet 3's index number would be 3. And index numbers are not enclosed in quotes. We're going to spend a few slides on referencing objects. So each worksheet in the worksheets collection is an object in 2 collections, which we mentioned already, worksheets and sheets. Each chart sheet is an object in 2 collections, charts and sheets. So there's another example of how to refer to sheet 1. You could use the sheets collection instead of the worksheets collection. Like a typical Office application, you get several ways of referring to the same object. You know, there's multiple ways of getting the same thing done in Excel. And along the way, you'll find the way that works best for you, although I do have some suggestions. So all Excel objects are under the application object in the hierarchy. Remember, Excel, the application, is at the top of the hierarchy. You access these objects by moving down the hierarchy and connecting each object with the dot operator. You can even access the value of a particular cell on the worksheet by using the range object, and you saw that when we reviewed our code. There is no cell object in VBA, really. It would be the range object even with 1 element. And here are additional examples on this slide of object references. So referring to a specific workbook, application dot workbooks, and then in parentheses and double quotes, the name of the workbook, including its extension. And then a specific worksheet in the workbook. If you're using the entire hierarchy, application dot workbooks, the name of the workbook, and then dot worksheets 1, the first sheet. Referring to the value of a cell. Your application dot workbooks, name dot worksheets 1 dot range A1 dot value. The last example is known as a fully qualified reference. It specifically refers to all the objects in the hierarchy from application down to range. So again, you have this PowerPoint in your video description for future reference. Now I'm going to tell you about simplifying object references. You want it to be as concise as possible, and I mentioned that earlier. It's easier to write and easier to troubleshoot should there be any issues. So Visual Basic for applications can assume some of the object references for you. For example, it assumes that the workbooks collection is within the application object. And that means that you don't have to reference that object in most cases. Another example here is that if you only have one workbook open, one Excel file open, it is the only one in the collection. So VBA assumes it is the active workbook, and you don't have to reference the workbooks collection. If the first worksheet is the active sheet in the workbook, you don't have to reference the worksheets collection, as VBA will assume it. So I'm going to go over these examples. The code that refers to the value of a cell, so starting with the application.workbooks, the name of the workbook in parentheses and double quotes, dot worksheets 1 by index number, dot range A1 dot value. If VBA is assuming the application object, it would just start with workbooks and the name of the workbook, so on and so forth. If it's the only open Excel file, it will assume the workbooks object, so you can just start with worksheets. And if the first sheet is the active sheet, all you would have to reference is range A1 dot value. And so the last example is the most concise and therefore preferable. You don't want to have to type all of this line, unless you just like to type like that. My arrow drawing is getting horrible here. But you don't have to type all of that. Why would you want to type all of that? Maybe fat finger the keyboard, whatever set of circumstances could happen, when all you would have to type would be this. And also, if someone is coming behind you, or if you have to troubleshoot the code, this is a lot more difficult to troubleshoot because it has more on this line than the last and preferable example. Now that we've gained an understanding of the Excel object model hierarchy, collections, and how to reference objects, we're ready to dive into Lesson 3, which is working with procedures and functions. Previously, you were introduced to modules and sub-procedures when we edited the VBA code that was generated by the macro we recorded. You're going to get more in-depth knowledge on those two topics during this lesson. So we're going to start by doing a deeper dive into modules and then procedures. Then we are going to move on to creating a standard module as well as creating a sub-procedure. You'll learn different methods of executing procedures or running them, including how to call procedures in this lesson. Then we're going to create a function procedure, and we're going to use the immediate window within the Visual Basic Editor to run it. You're going to learn how to get context-sensitive help within the Visual Basic Editor, which is really cool. We're going to use the vehicles macro enable file that we created, as well as another file in the video description. And it's another Excel file named received vehicles. Those two files need to be in the same directory for this lesson. You saw earlier that when we recorded a macro, VBA created a module to store the Visual Basic code in. And so we discussed how a module is a container of sorts that stores your VBA code. Well, there are two different types of modules. There are class modules, which allow you to create your own objects, and we'll begin using class modules when we get to Lesson 7. And then there's standard modules, one of which you already saw, and it uses the application objects. We also discussed that our code was put in a procedure. Specifically, in our case, it was a sub-procedure, began with the sub-statement and ended with the end sub-statement. So a procedure tells the application what to do as it defines a specific task. Specifically, it's a named group of statements that are run as a unit. For example, a block of code. A sub-procedure defines specific tasks. Like our add formatting sub-procedure, it told the application what to do. So insert a new row, and then we typed in the headers, that kind of thing. When responding to events, you'll learn about these later, they can be known as event procedures. There are also function procedures, and you'll be introduced to creating function procedures during this lesson. A function procedure actually returns a value. Property procedures are outside of the scope of this course, but they exist. And they're a series of statements that allow a programmer to create and manipulate custom properties. For example, read-only properties for forms. Before we dive in, we're going to go over the naming rules and conventions for procedures. Now, the rules cannot be broken. Conventions are suggestions, but just so you're aware of them, you need to know what they are. And I use conventions as well as the rules. So if you inherit an Excel macro-enabled workbook and you're looking at somebody else's code, they may be using the conventions. So anyway, let's go over this and then we'll get hands-on and learn more about procedures and modules by recording another macro. So when we're naming procedures, the name may be up to 255 characters. It can be alphanumeric. The first character must be a letter. You can't use any spaces or any of the special characters listed on the slide. And the names must be unique within a module. So you can't have to add formatting sub-procedures within the same module. It will disallow it. You just can't do it. And then the conventions. Begin the names with a verb. Use proper case for each word within the name. When two or more procedures are related, place the words that vary at the end. And there are some examples. So you could name a procedure close workbook, get new inventory, get selected date begin, and get selected date end. So if you're looking at these in a list, the ones that have the words that vary at the end would still be all together in the list. So you know that they're related procedures. I'm back in the vehicles macro-enabled file that we created earlier, and I'm going to switch to the new vehicles sheet tab. Now we're going to record a macro again to get this lesson started. And along the way and going forward beyond this lesson, whether we're recording macros or we're writing VBA code from scratch, we're also going to be using properties and we're going to be using methods. Now, you saw properties. We use properties to change the name of a module. We use properties to change the name of this particular sheet tab. And a method is an action that is taken on an object. So you'll learn how to access methods along the way as well. And I want to show you another way of starting a macro recording without accessing the ribbon. So I'd like to direct your attention to your status bar, and it's at the very bottom underneath your sheet tabs of your Excel screen. So the area all the way at the bottom. Now, it starts with ready. You may or may not have numlock and some of the other stuff that I have on my status bar. But in particular, I'm interested in making sure that you have this icon. I don't know, it looks like a spreadsheet with a little camera on it in a way. And if you don't have it, I'm going to show you how to get it down there. You can right-click in a blank area of the status bar, and you get the customized status bar menu. And notice that a lot of the things on my customized menu are already checked, which means they will show in my status bar as appropriate. So for example, caps lock and numlock. My numlock is on, and that's why it's showing down in the status bar. My caps lock is currently not being held down. I'm not enabling caps lock on my keyboard, I should say. So that one is not showing there. But were I to enable it, it would show in my status bar. The setting that we're interested in having you have down there is macro recording. That's that icon. So if it doesn't have a check mark in front of it, and you click on it, it will check it. If it does and you click on it, it unchecks it like it just did on mine. So I'll click on it again. And then you just click on any blank cell. You want to make sure you're in cell A1 before we start recording this macro. And what we're going to do is we're going to go down to that icon in our status bar that looks like a spreadsheet with looks like a camera lens to me. But if you hover over it, it says no macros are currently recording. Click to begin recording a new macro. And we're going to do just that. And it gives us our record macro dialog box. So you could start this process from the developer tab, or you can start it from that icon on your status bar. Now, for this macro, we want to name it using our rules and conventions. So we're going to start with a verb. Capital G, get. Capital N, new. Capital V, vehicles. So remember, you can't have spaces. You could use the underscore character, but I prefer to just use this convention. We're not going to use a shortcut key. We're going to store it in this workbook. And we're going to click in the description box and we're going to type copy and paste data from the received vehicles file. And again, once we click OK, it's ready to follow our instructions. So go ahead and click OK. Notice that the icon on your status bar now looks different. And it looks like a stop button. And if you hover over it, it says click here, or a macro is currently recording. Click to stop the recording. So we can start and stop it from the status bar as well. So what we want to do is we want to open the received vehicles file that is in the same directory as this file. And I'm going to use the shortcut combination Control O to bring up my open dialog box. I'm already in the proper directory for myself, and I'm going to just double click that received vehicles Excel file to open it. And once it's opened, you'll see that it has a limited amount of data. There's some VIN numbers and dealer cost. And so what we're going to do is we are going to click anywhere on the spreadsheet. It's only on sheet 1. And we're going to hold down our control key and type the letter A and the letter C. So A selects everything and C is the copy command. And now we want to switch back to our vehicles macro enabled file. So one way to do that is we can go to our View tab on the ribbon. The next to the last button is Switch Windows. And I'm going to just click on Vehicles to switch back to that file. We're already in cell A1 in the Vehicles file on the New Vehicles tab. I'm going to just do Control V as in Victor to paste in the information. We have one more step we're going to take before we stop this macro recording. I'm going to switch back to the Received Vehicles file, and I'm going to just close it. And now I can go down to my status bar and stop the recording. Before we switch over to the Visual Basic Editor to look at the code that we just generated, just wanted to give you some examples of methods. So I've said that a method is an action that is taken on an object. So clear contents is a method of the range object. It would empty the cells, delete everything that's in the cells, clear everything that's in the cells in the range. Add is a method of the workbook's collection object, and it's used to create a new workbook. And then you have activate, and that's a method of the worksheet object. It's used to activate a worksheet. You know, if I click on the inventory sheet tab, I'm activating that sheet. So examples of how you access the methods. You start with the object. So range A1 colon B11 in parentheses and double quotes. You use the dot notation And then you can access the method. Clear contents. Workbooks.add. Worksheets, you have to give it the name or the index number of the sheet. Activate. So we're seeing the dot notation used to call methods as well. And when you're in the editor and you do the dot, it sometimes gives you, and usually gives you built-in help that it will list the methods that are available for that particular object. I'm going to just delete this text box off of my spreadsheet. Then I'm going to Alt F11 to switch over to the Visual Basic editor. The first thing I want to point out is the Project Explorer window, the upper left corner. And if you look in your modules folder now, we renamed what used to be called Module 1, Mod First. So because we had closed the file and reopened it, when we recorded this macro, it created a new module. Since Module 1 wasn't in use anymore, it used that. And so we would have to go there to find the code that we just recorded the macro for. So I'm going to switch to Module 1, and it created a sub-procedure. We named it Get New Vehicles. We put stuff in the description explaining what it is. And, we can get rid of those extra green lines that are preceded by apostrophes that don't need to be there, just to kind of clean up the code. Of course, you want it as concise as possible. When we did Control O, the open command, it did this active window dot close, and then workbooks dot open, right? So open is a method of the workbooks object. Close is a method of the active window object. So we did workbooks open. We had to give it the name of the file and these characters here. So it says file name followed by a colon equal. Then there's a space and an underscore. The space and the underscore means the rest of this syntax, the rest of what is needed here, is on the next line. It's called the line continuation character. Space and underscore combined like that in Visual Basic is the line continuation character. And that's what we have after file name colon equal. If we didn't have that there, we would get an error message because it's saying, hey, you got to give me the path to the file name, including the file name. So it just goes to where I have on my hard drive, users, Trish, desktop, files for video description, and then it's in that received vehicles. The name of the file is received_vehicles.xlsx. And that line, starting with C, begins with an open double quote and ends with a closing double quote. And then I scrolled a little bit when I got over to that other file, receive vehicles, and it took note of that. That's this active window, small scroll down. And then we did Control A to select everything, which is A1 through B11. Range.select. Select is a method of the range object. And then we have range A2 activate. And then we did copy. So we actually just did Control AC and it created those 3 lines of code. And then after we copied it, we switched back over to the vehicles macro enabled file. We clicked in cell A1. And then we pasted what was on the clipboard onto the active sheet starting in cell A1. And then we went back over to received vehicles file, calling the activate method. And then we said close that window. And then, of course, with every sub-statement, you have your end sub-statement at the bottom. Now that we've reviewed this code that was generated from us recording that macro, there's a few things we want to do. We want to rename Module 1 so it's more specific, and we want to create a new sub-procedure from scratch in the newly named module. So let's start. In our Project Explorer window, I'm going to just click on Module 1, go down to Properties window, double-click Name, and we're going to call this mod. Remember that 3-character prefix, which is a convention, not a rule. Mod New Vehicles. And I'm using the proper casing all mushed together. And then I'm going to press Enter. So we have mod first and mod new vehicles. In mod new vehicles, click at the end of your in sub statement and press Enter. We're going to go to the Insert menu and we're going to choose Procedure. And this is a Microsoft product, so this is just one way of doing this. In the Add Procedure dialog box, we're going to work our way from top to bottom, right? In the name box, we're going to name this procedure Move Cells. So capital M, capital C mushed together. Procedure name Move Cells. The type defaults to sub for a sub procedure. And we're going to talk about the scope in a little while, but we're going to leave it on public. And we're going to just click OK. So a couple of things happened. It automatically put a dividing line between your Get New Vehicle sub-procedure and this new sub-procedure. And it has the keyword public because we did it from within the dialog box. And again, you'll learn about scope in a little while. And that's what public speaks to. It gave us our sub and our in sub statements. And of course, the open and closing parentheses at the end of the first line. So what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you click outside of the closing parenthesis, public sub move cells, press Enter twice, and then press the Tab key on your keyboard. I talked about code being concise, but also you need to know this. You're going to probably end up spending more time troubleshooting code than actually writing code. It's just the way it goes. And there's certain things in terms of how you format your code that makes it easier to review when you're troubleshooting. And indentation is one of those things. I like to look at my code and see the public sub and in sub statements at the same margin. And that's what we're doing by indenting here. So now you're going to type a few lines of code, 4 lines to be exact, and you can take them off of my screen. The first line is going to be columns, plural, open paren, open double quote, B, close your double quote, close your paren. So columns B, so we're referencing column B. You're going to use the dot notation and start typing select. And if I don't type it with a capital S, when I press Enter at the end, it will automatically capitalize it for me. And now we're going to type selection dot cut, Enter. I'll explain it all when we get it in. And then we're going to type columns, open paren, open double quote, G, close the quote, close the paren, dot, select, active sheet, dot, paste. And typically, I like to have a blank line after public sub and a blank line before end sub. So my previous block, my get new vehicle sub procedure, I'm going to just get that blank line above the end sub statement. So basically, it's going to select everything in column B, and it's going to cut it, put it on the clipboard, And then it's going to select column G, and it's going to paste what was in column B into column G. Congratulations, you just wrote 4 lines of VBA code from scratch. Now, earlier we added some buttons to our toolbar, and we used one of these earlier. Be anywhere in between your public sub and your end sub statements, and go on and click that compile VBA project that we put up on the toolbar earlier. And again, if there were any errors in your code, you would be notified of it. It's kind of line checking your code. You accessed the select method of the columns object. And once you have something selected, it is known as the selection object. So you access the cut method of the selection object and the paste method of the active sheet object in that code block. So let's go ahead and save. There's save on the toolbar, or you could do Control S. And then we're going to do Alt F11 to switch back over to Excel so we can test this code. There is another way that you can access your macros in here. So earlier we accessed our macros from the Developer tab by using the second button, Macros. We also accessed it from the View tab of the ribbon by going to the last button, which is Macros. Well, there's another way of doing it, and it's a shortcut key. So you can use Alt F8 to open the macro dialog box. And so in here, you'll see your Add Formatting macro, your Get New Vehicles macro. Both of those were based off of macro recordings, I should say. And then Move Cells is listed in here, even though we created that sub procedure from scratch. So this is just another way, Alt F8, that you can open the macro dialog box. And we're going to double click the Move Cells procedure. So you could click it once and then choose Run, or you could just double click it to run it. And it did exactly what we asked it to do, just very quickly. Selected everything in column B, cut it, and then pasted it into column G. So the next part we're going to do is going to further our automation. What we want to do is we want to edit the Add Formatting sub-procedure so that it works on this sheet, the new vehicle sheet that we're currently on. And before we do that, we're going to delete everything on this sheet, new vehicles. We're going to do Control A to select everything, and then we're going to just press delete, and then just click in cell A1. Now we want to go back over to the Visual Basic Editor. Alt F11 will get you there. And in the Project Explorer, we're going to double click Mod First, which is where our Add Formatting sub-procedure resides. Now, notice the first 2 lines in our code block. That's when we right-clicked on row 1 and we inserted a new row. Well, we don't want to do that again. We want to keep the row headings that we already have. So we don't want it to insert a blank row above row 1, which now contains the headings. So we need to delete just those 2 lines of code, rows 1:1.select and selection.insert, shift, blah, blah, blah. The first 2 lines. So I already have them selected, and I'm going to delete those 2 lines. And then what I'm going to do is, in your Project Explorer window, go ahead and double click Mod New Vehicles again to get back into that module where we have our Get New Vehicles, which is the result of a macro. And notice when you do a macro, it gives you in green that it's based off of a macro. You didn't create this code. And then whatever description you put in, right? So we should probably add comments, just so I can be a good example here, to our Move Cells sub-procedure. I'm going to click at the end of the public sub line and press enter twice. And then I'm going to type an apostrophe. Now, when you type an apostrophe, it's like saying the Visual Basic, hey, heads up. The next thing I'm going to type is going to be a comment, which means you're not going to execute it when the code executes. It's just there for informational purposes. And we're going to say that this is going to select and cut contents of column B and paste into column G. And then when I press enter, it will turn that line green because we started with an apostrophe. Before we do the next bit, I just want to go over that there are different ways to execute your procedures or run them within the application or in VBA. So we've used some of these already. We've used the macro dialog box. The ones that are highlighted in yellow on this slide, we will use during this course. So later on, we'll use the Run Sub User Form button on the VBE Toolbar. We've already used the macro dialog box. We're going to call the procedure from another sub procedure, which is the example we're going to do next. Later on, we're going to add a button to the Quick Access Toolbar in Excel. You can also attach the procedure to an event, which you will learn later. And also, you can run it from what's known as the immediate window in Visual Basic Editor. So many different ways to execute procedures. So like I mentioned, we're going to be calling the procedure from another sub-procedure in this lesson. We're going to click at the end of the end sub statement in your Move Cells public sub-procedure, and we're going to press enter twice. We're going to create another sub-procedure here. We're going to do it in a different way. And it's going to be known as the calling procedure. You'll see how this works, and I'll explain more after we get it done. Now, we're going to actually just type this in. We're not going to use the Add Procedure, Insert Procedure dialog box. And so we clicked after End Sub. We pressed enter a couple of times, and we're going to type sub, and then we're going to name it Get New Inventory. And press enter twice. So you get the line, the dividing line between the Move Cells sub-procedure. Notice we didn't have to type the opening and closing paren or the end sub statement. The Visual Basic Editor will supply you with those when you're typing it from scratch. So now we're going to press, I'm going to just do Shift Tab to outdent. Let's do a comment here. I'm trying to be a good example. We're going to type an apostrophe, and we're going to put, this is a calling procedure that is calling 3 other procedures. And press enter at the end of the line. It turns green. Press enter again, and then tab to indent. We simply need to give it the names of the procedures. So this is known as a calling procedures, and the procedure names we are going to type are known as called procedures. So we are going to type get new vehicles, enter, move cells, enter, add formatting, enter. It should look like this on my screen. So, get new inventory's purpose is to kind of bundle those 3 other procedures together in the order that they're listed there, and it will execute them when it is executed. So, we get 3 for the price of 1. We execute get new inventory, and it executes 3 other sub procedures for us. Go ahead and compile your project and save. We have our 3 procedures that are called procedures in our Get New Inventory sub-procedure, 2 of which reside in this same module. Add formatting resides in mod first. We're going to talk now about the scope of procedures and why it's possible that we can access the add formatting procedure from a different module. So of course we're going to review the scope of procedures on a slide because again the slide deck is in the files in the video description and you'll be able to use it for future reference. So scope determines where the procedure may be used. You have basically 3 different scopes, really 2. So the first one is public. If a procedure declaration is preceded by the keyword public, this makes the procedure accessible to all modules in the Visual Basic project. If the procedure declaration is preceded by the keyword private, this makes the procedure available only in the module where it resides. It cannot be accessed from any other modules or from the Excel workbook. And then you have undeclared. So we have no private procedures at this point. If no keyword is inserted at the start of a sub or a function declaration, the default is public. Okay, so I'm going to switch back over to the Visual Basic Editor and we'll take a look at this. And I'm still in Mod New Vehicles. So we have the result of a macro. We recorded a macro and we named it Get New Vehicles. It simply named it sub. It didn't put public or private, so it's considered undeclared, which means it's public. Then we created a procedure by using the insert menu. And because in there, and I'll bring up that dialog box, the scope is defaulting to public. So when we created the move cells procedure, it added the public keyword. And then we created one from scratch, sub get new inventory. We didn't type public before sub. We left it undeclared. So all of these are public procedures. And if we go to mod first, add formatting is also undeclared, which means it's public. And I look at the end of that and I want that blank line above in sub, so I just modified it and did that. So because add formatting is public, I'm going to go back to mod new vehicles. We can access it by calling it from this module. That's why that's possible. The scope of procedures matter. Now, one other little fix we're going to do, because I already know it's going to be an error, and you may not even have this line in your Get New Vehicles sub-procedure in Mod New Vehicles. But that first line of code, since Get New Vehicles is included in our calling procedure, if we have the first line saying active window close, it's going to just close the file and then it won't be able to run the rest of the code. So that very first line, active window close, if you have that line, could cause you to have an issue with the code. If you don't have that line as your first line, if your first line is workbooks.open, file name, so on and so forth, you're good to go. But if not, you want to delete that first line, active window close. We're going to leave it at the bottom, but not at the top. And then go ahead and save your code. And now we're ready to Alt F11 to switch over to Excel. And we're on the new vehicle sheet in cell A1. We're going to do Alt F8 to bring up our macros box. And we want to run our calling procedure, Get New Inventory. So I'm going to just double click it. And my screen will flicker for a moment and then ultimately stop. Okay, so what happened? Well, it ran the bundle. let's switch back over Alt F11. The first thing that it did is it ran get new vehicles. So it opened the received vehicles file, it selected everything, and then it copied everything. And then it went back over to our vehicles macro enabled file, made sure it was in cell A1, and it pasted the data. And then it went back over to received vehicles file and closed it. After that, it did the move cells sub procedure. So once it brought in that information from received vehicles, it selected everything in column B and it pasted it, it cut it, and then it pasted it in column G. And then after that, it did add formatting, which is in mod first. And that's where it added the headings for us, right? So it added our column headings, and we didn't want it to create a new row there because it came in with a heading row. So we had already modified this. It did the currency format or accounting number format, and it auto-fitted the columns. It also made the headings bold and centered in their cells. So it ran the bundle. We ran one sub procedure that called 3 other procedures. So when I go back and look at it in Excel, we're still on new vehicles, right? It moved the dealer costs to the appropriate column, applied the appropriate formatting to it, and it added the headings instead of the headings that came in from the received vehicles file and the formatting that it did. So you saw that calling procedures lend themselves to efficiency, but there's further efficiency to be had. Earlier, we discussed how sometimes a sub-procedure is known as an event procedure, and that happens when you attach it to an event. So, first thing we're going to do here is we're going to do Control A on this new vehicles sheet to select everything, and then we're going to press delete. We're going to clear the sheet. Just click in cell A1 and switch back over to your Visual Basic editor. Now on the left side, you attach in order to make something an event procedure, you have to access an object's events. So we're going to double click in the Project Explorer window. We're going to double click Sheet 3, New Vehicles. Now notice at the very top of your screen, you have 2 different drop downs above Option Explicit, which we still haven't talked about, but we're getting there. You have a General box, and to the right, you have a Declarations box. Both of them have drop downs on their far right sides. The left side, where it says General, is known as the object list. The right side, where it says Declarations currently, is known as the procedures or events list. So we're going to do the drop down arrow to the right of General. And the only thing, because we have Sheet 3 selected, the only object we're going to see is Worksheet. So we're going to select Worksheet. And it creates this whole like sub-procedure framework. It's private, so it's only available within where we're putting it. It's attached only to the new vehicle sheet, which the system knows as Sheet 3, right? So the first thing, the default event for a worksheet, if you look at the right now, where it used to say Declarations, it says Selection Change. That's just the default event. That's not the event that we want. What we want to happen is we want our calling procedure to run whenever the new vehicle sheet is activated. So we're going to do the drop down all the way to the far right of Selection Change. And these are all worksheet events. right? Activate, before delete, calculate. You have a whole list. We want to select the activate event. So now it gives us the framework for a private sub procedure that it names worksheet underscore activate. Typically with event procedures, you don't change the names, right? It's kind of like hard coded. So it's that particular worksheet's activate event that we're going to code. So we don't need this second block. We don't need this. This is just what was created. As soon as we selected worksheet, it selected the default event, which is selection change. So we can just delete that. Click at the end of the parentheses on the private sub worksheet activate line. Press enter twice, just so you get that blank space again. We're going to press tab so it's indented. And we're simply going to call our calling procedure by name. We named it Get New Inventory. So that's the one that has the 3 called procedures within it. So we're saying whenever the new vehicle sheet is activated, go ahead and run that bundled calling procedure known as Get New Inventory. Go ahead and compile your VBA project using the toolbar. You want to get in the habit of doing that and save and switch back to Excel. Just make sure you're in cell A1 on new vehicles, which we deleted everything off of. And now we're going to go to our inventory sheet tab at the bottom. And then we're going to click back on the new vehicle sheet tab to activate it. And voila! As soon as we activated that sheet, it ran our Get New Inventory calling procedure. So we get the same result. We didn't have to do Alt F8 to get into the macros dialog box to make it run or anything like that. We simply made it an event procedure, and it was the activate event for this particular sheet. We are going to once again clear this sheet by doing Control A and delete. Just click back in cell A1 and go ahead and save your vehicles file. So now we're ready to create a function procedure. And if you remember from earlier, function procedure performs a calculation and returns a single value or an array of values. So differs from a sub procedure. So when you create a function procedure in VBA, it can only be executed in 2 ways compared to the 9 ways you can execute a sub procedure. You can call the procedure from a sub procedure or another function procedure, or you can use the function in a worksheet formula. It becomes a user-defined function in your Excel application. And you'll see both of these play out when we do this. We're going to create a new module for this. So I'm going to just go up to the Insert menu in the Visual Basic Editor, and I'm going to choose Module. So it gives me a new Module 1. And let's rename that module using the Properties window. We're going to call it Mod and then capital F Function. And in this module, we're going to create a function. And what it's going to do is we're going to give it different values for an MSRP. And depending on the value, it's going to display a message. And once we get it typed in and stuff, it'll be easier to kind of explain it to you. So in your mod function, I'm going to click at the top after option explicit and just press enter. And we're going to type the word function and a space. And we're going to call it MSRP. So all of that is capitalized. And then capital S status. And then in the parentheses, we have to have an open parenthesis. We're going to type MSRP. That's a parameter. You'll also hear it as an argument. So we have to pass the function an argument in order for it to give us a value as its return. And after that, you're going to press enter. And notice it gives you the end function statement, just like it does when we do a sub procedure, and it gives us the end sub statement. So I'm going to press enter again, and I am going to press my tab key to indent. It's just a structure thing. Visual Basic doesn't care. Now we're going to build what's known as an if construct. It's more specifically, it's an if then else if else construct, which is a lot to say and can be overwhelming. It's similar to the if function in Excel. You're being rudely introduced to it for this function, but you'll get a deeper dive in control of flow structures in a later lesson. So I will explain this after we get it typed in. So we're going to type if and then MSRP. We're going to do the less than symbol, 20,000, no punctuation on the 20,000, and type then and press enter. Now tab a little bit more, one more time. So if the MSRP value is less than 20,000, then if that is true, it's going to do what we say on this line we're going to type now. We're going to type MSRP status, the name of our function, equals, and in double quotes, less than 20K, and close your quotes. So if the MSRP value is less than 20,000, it's going to say as the function return, the result of the function, it's going to display the text less than 20K. Press enter and then shift tab, and you're going to type else if, and it's all one word, initial capital letters, MSRP less than 30,000, then next line down, you're going to tab MSRP status, the name of the function, equals, and in double quotes, less than 30K. And close your quotes, enter, and shift tab. We're almost done. We have 2 more lines. Now we're going to type else, just else, not else if, space, MSRP status, the name of the function again, equals, and in double quotes, greater than or equal to 30K. And close your double quotes. Enter, and we need an end if statement. So end if. And press enter one more time so you get that blank line between end if and end function. So if the MSRP is less than 20,000, it will display the text less than 20K. If it's less than 30,000, meaning it's not less than 20,000, but it's less than 30,000, it'll say less than 30K. It'll display that text. If neither of those statements are true, if it's not less than 20,000 and it's not less than 30,000, it's going to just display greater than or equal to 30K. So the else statement, and notice when you got to the end of the line, it put that colon after else. You didn't have to type that. So there's a line editor. Every time you get to the end of the line, it's checking the line to make sure it's okay. So this is known as an if construct. It's going to do different things depending on whether a statement is true. And that's how you create the function procedure. Now, we should go ahead and compile our project. So again, you just need to be anywhere between function and end function and do your compile project. Make sure there's no errors. And then we're going to save. So there are two ways to execute a function procedure. The first way is by using what's called the immediate window, and it's really testing the function to make sure that it works properly. And so we're going to do that way first, and then I'll tell you about the second way, which is really super cool in my opinion, and you'll see that soon. So the first thing we need to do is get the immediate window open in Visual Basic Editor. So we're going to go to the View menu and we're going to choose Immediate Window, and it opens in the bottom of the screen. In the immediate window, we can test this function procedure. I'll explain it after we type it in. You're going to type question mark and then MSRP status, the name of the function, and then in parentheses, now if you notice right underneath where we're typing in the immediate window, right underneath that, it's showing that in the parentheses it's waiting for us to give it a argument. So we used MSRP in the parentheses as a parameter, and now we have to pass it an argument in order for the function to work, which means we have to give it a number that represents an MSRP. In the parentheses, we're going to just type 10,000, no punctuation, close the parenthesis, and press enter. Question mark means the same as print in VBA, right? So it's saying print the result right there in the immediate window. So if we look at our if block, we said if it's less than 20,000, we want it to say less than 20K. And that's exactly what it did. Now we can use either the question mark or the print keyword to the same effect in the immediate window. So now in the immediate window, you're going to type print and then MSRP status, open paren, and we're going to put 20,000 in there and close the parenthesis. And now press enter. So it's giving us less than 30,000. So question mark and the print keyword do the same exact thing in the immediate window. We're testing our function to make sure that it works. So let's do another one. We could do either question mark or print, whichever your preferred one is. And we're going to set it up again, MSRP status. And this time in the parentheses, we're going to put 40,000, close the parentheses, press enter, and we should get the greater than or equal to 30K. The else statement is working because it's not less than 20,000. It's not less than 30,000, the parameter that we gave it, the argument that we gave it in the parentheses. It's 40,000. So we're getting greater than or equal to 30K. If you're creating super complicated function procedures, you would want to test them in your immediate window, giving it different values to make sure it works. The other way to test it, let's go ahead and switch over to Excel. I'm doing Alt F11 there. Okay. And let's go to the Inventory Sheet tab and click in cell I2. In cell I2, you're going to type an equal sign like you would for any built-in Excel function. And then you're going to start typing the name of the function. We're going to type MS. And our MSRP status function shows up here. It's a user-defined function in the Excel application. Once you create it, unless you go and delete that function, you will be able to use it in Excel. We're going to click on, or since MSRP is already selected, I'm going to just tab key. It's called tabbing it in. And then we are going to click on cell H2. The very first MSRP. And we don't even have to type the closing parenthesis here because we're doing it in Excel application. So go ahead and press enter. And then click on I2, and the little notch in the lower right hand corner of the cell is known as the fill handle. And once I put my mouse on top of the fill handle, it looks like a thin black cross. and I am going to double click. So you'll notice it'll fill it all the way down to the bottom until it runs into a blank, right? So if I do Control N, it filled it all the way down to row 105. And it's looking at each MSRP's value and determining what to display in the adjoining cell. And so we are going to right click on the column I column heading and delete that column. And I want to show you something else since we're in here. Go to the Formulas tab on your ribbon, and the first button is Insert Function. Click it. Where it says, or select a category most recently used, do the drop-down arrow, and you might have to scroll down to see it, but you're looking for a category called User Defined. Now, there's going to be stuff in here that you are like, what does that mean? Don't worry about it. There's stuff that comes into Excel automatically. But you'll see your MSRP status in that list. So that is a user-defined function in the Excel application, which I think is just pretty cool. We can just cancel out of that and go ahead and save your file. So our last topic in this lesson is getting context-sensitive help in the Visual Basic Editor. So I'm going to do Alt F11 and switch back over to VBE. And in VBE, I'm still in my mod function module. I'm going to just click anywhere in the word function at the beginning of that function procedure. And I'm going to press F1 on my keyboard. So it brings up the context help box because you're in Excel Visual Basic for Applications, and it's saying that there's an object in both Visual Basic and Excel called function. We're interested in the VBA function, so we can just either double click it or go over and click on help. It's already selected. So it launches your browser, and I can tell you that the VBA documentation from Microsoft is awesome. So it gives you the function statement from VBA. It lets you know that it declares the name, arguments, and code that form the body of a function procedure. It gives you the syntax. So, just like sub-procedures, there's different statements, public, private, right? If it's undeclared, it's public. There's also friend and static. And then the function name, and then in parentheses, the argument list. And you can give it a data type as its return as well, which we didn't have to do on ours, right? There's also an exit function statement that we didn't need to use. So it gives you the breakdown about everything, descriptions on everything, right? And then there's remarks at the bottom. And so it says, there's one line in here that says all executable code must be in procedures. You can't define a function procedure inside of another function sub or property procedure. And notice that sub there is a link. So if I click on that link, it brings me to context-sensitive help about the sub statement. And the other thing I'll point out in here is on the left side, it lets you know that you're looking at the sub statement, right? So if I scroll up on the left side, there's the if then else construct. And again, we're going to do a deeper dive into that later. But if I wanted more information on that, I can just click on it on the left side, right? And it gives you all the information you need to know about that. If I continue to scroll up, it's all under the heading statements, which is under the heading reference, which is under the heading language reference. So anything you need to know, I'm going to just switch back over to my Visual Basic Editor. You can access it by pressing F1 when you are on a particular keyword, right? So it works that way. It gets you into the Microsoft documentation. Really good context-specific help at your fingertips. So we covered a lot in Lesson 3. And just to recap what we covered, we went into a deeper dive about the types of modules that are available within Visual Basic and the types of procedures. Then we went on to creating a standard module. We created a sub-procedure, and we called procedures by creating a calling procedure. You also learned about the scope of procedures. Then we created a function procedure, and we tested it using the immediate window before going into Excel and accessing it in its interface as a user-defined function. After that, you were shown how to get context-sensitive help from within the Visual Basic editor. Thank you for attending Excel 2019 Visual Basic for Applications video course.